Point being is that this couldn't be more of a windfall, break, a reprieve for the Russian economy and Putin's obviously ability to take a sigh of relief. What do you think this means in the short to medium term? Because this doesn't change the structural implications. This doesn't change the systemic challenge. If you look at the structural integrity of the Russian economy, it's terrible.
It's not going to save Putin. It's going to prolong the agony of Russian economy. But the damage is so big that even selling oil at 90, at 80 is not going to completely change the situation over. The point, Russian oil is not easy and fast to be delivered to customers in India and China, perhaps in other countries. It's going to help Putin in the short run, probably not going to save him in the long run.
This is the Global Gambit.
Welcome back, everyone, to part 2. My name is Pyotr. This is the Global Gambit. We are joined here by Konstantin Samoilov of Inside Russia. If you missed part 1, go back and watch it. We covered, is there a coup? Where is Putin? What's going on with the state of cattle? And we're going to be building on that in this second half with a greater look at the Russian economy and what could happen after Putin. And, of course, the front lines in Ukraine as well. Now, Konstantin, we left off on the understanding that I'm at fault because the British are enemy number one. Being half English and half Russian, I clearly am connected to both sides, and therefore I drive the extent of the war economy, as you rightfully accuse me of on that cliffhanger at the end of part 1. So, in this part 2, I want to understand from you, Konstantin. What do you think, let's run with this theory that Putin is facing greater and greater instability, that there could be a struggle. So what could actually happen, therefore? What would it look like? Would we see the FSB gradually take over and maybe someone like Patrushev becomes the head of the whole thing? Because some people look at all sorts of different names, but I personally think it has to be someone from the security services. It can't be, Medvedev is an alcoholic. What's his face? Shoigu doesn't have the brains or aggression. What do you think would happen? And who do you think are the candidates to replace Putin?
First of all, there is instability, and I break it down into 3 parts. First is economic instability, and it's bad. It's bad. If you follow the news from Russia, last 3 weeks have been incredibly bad. It's landsliding. In Russia, no one was prepared for that. They keep calling me. I used to call Russians and ask them, how things were going. Now they call me and they ask me, what the hell is going on? Perhaps you know. I know. I've been warning about that for the last 3.5 years. I know very well what's happening, okay? But it's kind of too late for them. Now, second instability is political. Because Putin his control is slipping from him. He's becoming weaker and weaker. You need to have money to run Russia because you have to buy everyone with money, and the money is running out. I'm trying to come up with a very primitive explanation. So Putin's power is based on money, and he has run out of money. And number 3, that social instability. People are waking up and they're seeing that there is so much injustice and unfairness happening around them, and no one can explain any longer why. What are the reasons? Fighting in Ukraine for what? Now more and more I hear from Russians, what are we fighting for? I didn't hear it until 2026, okay? Now I keep hearing more. This all leads to change in Russian political regime. Okay, the changes can be absolutely different. We don't know. At some point, the change will become uncontrollable.
Yeah.
And if we talk about the coup, and it's a very strong word, as we discussed in the first part, the coup is usually decided before it happens. Okay, it's quick and firm. When the situation is unprepared and it's lawlessness and it becomes a civil war, because when it's not prepared, it's just, naturally comes to a point where the power that controls everything falls apart and there's no one to step in and replace that power. Then there's chaos. Okay, so if there will be a controlled change of the regime, then I am sure that the person who would replace Putin is not known right now to us. Just as Putin was not known to general public when he made the president. They decided for Putin to become the president, and it only took 6 months for him to come from being a nobody, basically, to the president of Russia. He was made the prime minister, and then he was made the president. And I think that the next president, if the regime continues and stays and somehow is saved by Siloviki, that the next Putin will be someone who is a nobody now. It's not going to be Patrushev, Bortnikov, Mishustin, definitely
Belousov?
not Medvedev. Who's no,
Why?
the guy
He's a technocrat. He would steer the ship in the ideologies of Putin. Why would someone who is completely unknown have the ability to take over in a post-Putin Russia?
Because he's not going to take over. He's going to be a puppet, a face. He didn't take over. He was controlled by Yeltsin's family and by the KGB. For the first few years, he was not independent in his decisions. And then, step by step, he seized power with help of the KGB, because after all, he's a KGB officer. He's a semi-colonel. But at first, for 2 to 3 years, he was absolutely a puppet. And the person who will replace Putin will also be a puppet. And perhaps he'll be controlled by a group of Siloviki, let's say Patrushev, most likely, if they pull this over, if they will make it happen and then replace Putin. Most likely, if in the current state, it would be Patrushev, Kolokoltsev, Bortnikov, all real power holders in Russia with agencies who are armed and can use legal violence against Russian citizens legally. That's a real power. That's the power that Putin holds right now, because he controls those Siloviki, okay, and he pays them with power and money. Now, if they decide to overthrow Putin, they will replace him with someone that they control. They will make sure that they control that person 100%. So, and after that, who knows?
Okay, well, that's interesting, because obviously there isn't going to be a sort of a repeat of what Putin managed to do, because that would completely undermine what came before, right? That's why I wonder whether sort of like a caretaker, someone like Patrushev, who's highly linked to Putin's approach and mindset community, would be someone who did it. And then there was a younger person who over time was molded, or one of Putin's own offspring took over. You know, when we look at totalitarian states like North Korea and what's happening with Kim Jong-un, and his sister actually is being floated as the replacement for him, and she's even worse. And fascinating, actually, for just a tangent for a moment, people are interested in the Russian-North Korean relationship. From my understanding, Putin has been warning Kim Jong-un, the current supreme leader of North Korea, about his own sister, because the FSB have been watching her, and it's just like she makes Kim Jong-un look a bit soft. So very interesting relationship and sort of situation there if people are interested in that niche bit of international relations. But so Konstantin, within all of this, of course, the reason I mentioned Belousov is because he's been the economic minister, but managing the war economy like a defense minister. So, or is he that? No, he's the defense minister, but managing it like the economy, right? So, when you look at what he's doing and the rest of the political sort of establishment under Putin, how are they having to navigate this? Because Putin is saying one thing, he disappears, and so they're having to sort of limit the damage, the fallout when Putin disappears, and the impact on the economy. There's a question in there somewhere.
Pyotr, one step back. I have a good explanation for you about the future leader of Russia. The ruler and leader are different things, separate things. The leader, true leader, would have to rise from the bottom and take power in his or her hands. There were quite a few leaders in Russia. General Rokhlin, Boris Nemtsov, just to name two of them. Vladimir Putin made sure that those leaders were killed. They're not with us any longer. Now, the only leader I could think of right now who could rise from the bottom and take power in Russia is Yekaterina Duntsova. She is closely monitored by the secret police. She's a tiny speck on the political map. She has no resources whatsoever, but she has a heart and she has the character of the leader, the will of the leader. Okay, she is the one who basically stood up to Putin in the previous presidential elections, and she was shut down by Russian state. She was not allowed to run against Putin, but she is the only person who actually I see could somehow rise to the magnitude of someone who would take power and lead Russia. The rest are not leaders. Belousov is not leader. Belousov has never been the leader. He was always... He's a bureaucrat. He's not technocrat. He was always an employee of the state. What's that?
Why is he not a technocrat?
Define the technocrat.
Well, technocrat is purposely input into a position to manage something in a certain way. So when, I don't know, take the Italian economy, when Italy was in an absolute dumpster fire after the sovereign debt crisis of 2012, Mario Draghi and some others were put specifically in place. Instead of political figures, they imposed technocrats to help manage the economy in a very specific way. Bureaucrats are more just civil servants, people who are there in a general capacity. Technocrats are more defined in a specific role. So Belousov, for me, was put in that position, even though it's not his title area at all. He was put in there very specifically because the economy was becoming so bad for the Russians that they needed someone to be both defense and economic combined. He's not just a general guy. That's my opinion. You know, if you think that's inherently wrong, then I welcome your pushback.
Pyotr, I can't say it's wrong. I just say that I disagree with it. Okay, I could be wrong too. I find Belousov...
This is why we have these conversations.
I am absolutely sure that Belousov is a bureaucrat. Perfect bureaucrat. He's anywhere to being close to being technocrat. Now, he is he started his career in Gosplan of the USSR. He's an economist. And ever since he was under rulers, first of the Soviet Union and then of Russia, in various government bodies, either in charge of certain government agencies or advising. So he was Putin's advisor for, I don't know, economic advisor for I don't know how many years. He never did anything. He advised. He explained economic concepts. He's a bureaucrat. He can't do things. He can talk about things. He was placed to the seat of the chair of the Minister of Defense to make sure that the Ministry of Defense is weakened, because Putin is afraid of one person who is in charge of the armed forces of Russian Federation. Because, you know, by pledge, every Russian officer and soldier must listen to orders, must obey the orders of the Minister of Defense. And if the Minister of Defense will give the order, turn around and go to Moscow, they will have to obey, and they will. And that person was Shoigu. For a very long time, Shoigu was a close friend of Putin and very loyal to Putin, and he never posed threat to Putin. But you know what? He started posing threat, and Putin took care of him. He replaced him with Belousov. What's that?
Shoigu's an idiot.
No, Shoigu used to be the Minister of Defense for a very long time, since 2012.
He's not a clever bloke. He's not very intelligent, is he?
He was loyal. You don't... Well, I think that's exactly... He was placed in the position of the Minister of Defense because he wasn't clever. Putin doesn't not need a clever man in charge of the armed forces. That would be an instant threat.
But that's my point.
Because he could plot against Putin.
But if he's an idiot, how can he have the capacity to take over the entirety of the Russian state? He's not Fidel Castro. He doesn't strike me as a particularly inherently intellectual, ideologically. He's a dominantly.
You know what? Putin knew that the instability that is happening right now would eventually come. And he knew even idiot in charge of the armed forces, but idiot with knowledge and connections inside the armed forces. Shoigu put a lot of generals into their positions by his order, okay? So loyal to him. You don't need to be a smart man, you need to be well connected and supported by the generals.
It sounds like Stalin when he became general secretary of the party, and then he started replacing people. Stalin wasn't inherently intelligent necessarily, but he put the right people in the right places to take over.
Just to give you one example that supports my theory. When Vladimir Putin fired Shoigu, that the Ministry of Defense was blocked, the building, the HQ in Moscow, was blocked for 2 days. No one could get in, could get out. The private army that belongs to Moscow mayor, basically one of the most powerful forces, the special force.
Yeah.
It's officially it's the organization that's in charge of the security of Moscow subway, but that's a private army. They blocked the Ministry of Defense, and they made sure that the transition went smoothly. Okay. Now, why would they do that if Putin thought that Shoigu was not a threat? Because Shoigu has Spetsnaz GRU at his command, well, had at his command, and he just would give the order to take over Moscow. Spetsnaz GRU, which is located right outside Moscow, would take over the Kremlin and all the agencies immediately. That's a lethal force, okay? So they're not, I don't know more details. I just see the science and I connect the dots. So I think that Shoigu started posing a threat, and Shoigu was fired, but not ousted. He was made the Secretary of Security Council, and Putin put him in a can. Putin can always bring him back and say, hey, it was Shoigu who is in charge, who is responsible for all failures of Russian army. Shoigu was the Minister of Defense since 2012, and, you know, it's under him Russian army fell apart because it was world's strongest army, number 2, and after American. And then when it invaded Ukraine, we all saw that it was incapable. It's Shoigu's fault. It's Shoigu's orders to, to retreat and all of that. So that's one possibility. Now, we are kind of going into a conspiracy territory, okay, but I'm just telling you that there are possibilities there.
Okay.
And Putin put Belousov in charge because Belousov is absolutely hated by the generals. He didn't even serve in the army. He's embodiment of everything that the generals hate. Okay, and since he became the Minister of Defense, he hasn't done anything. Not one single thing. The only official action he did was he was screaming at subcontractors, threatening them with prison terms if they didn't finish building some kind of like storage facility. It was back in 2024, and that was it. He was at the meeting when the Ukrainians invaded Kursk province and took the control of part of the Kursk province. He was there with Putin. He was so afraid they didn't even show his face. The camera was filming him from the back, okay? That's what the current Minister of Defense is about. He did not say a word. He hasn't done anything. If you know, perhaps I missed something, let me know. Because I watched this guy. He's nowhere to be seen, nowhere to be found, and he hasn't done anything, absolutely nothing. So he's definitely not a good candidate he can't take over power in Russia. He's a nobody.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a clear cut or a definitive statement. It's more, as much of this is, as you say, and we're agreeing on the speculative, right? There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of spitballing of ideas. That's what any channel's doing, really, unless we are a unique. I have an interesting conversation with a Russian official next week, in the next couple of days, which I think people, if they want to have watch a proper debate with someone who works in the Russian government, should be on the lookout for that. So my point being is that we're not like those people, right, who have an inside knowledge necessarily. I just thought Belousov is quite an interesting consideration because he has this very particular mandate. He's been put in this position because of very specific conditions Russia is now in. So it's just worth pondering. But I wanted to look a little bit more about the Russian economy as well, because
May I interrupt you? I
yeah,
thought
yeah,
of
yeah.
one
I've
technocrat.
interrupted you, so go for it.
I have thought of
Yeah.
one technocrat who actually exists in Russia, and that man
Oh,
is Mikhail Mishustin. Now he can get things done. He was in He was placed in charge of Russian Internal Revenue Service, and he absolutely rehauled it. He upgraded. He made it very strong, very efficient. Okay, so and then after he was placed in the chair of the Prime Minister of Russia. Perhaps another technocrat is the mayor of Moscow, Sobyanin. These two people are somewhat close to the what you described, a technocrat. You put a person in charge and he get things done. You give him responsibility, he can or she can get things done, right? So Mishustin definitely can get things done, and Sobyanin as well. Not the only two people, but they are absolutely loyal to Putin, and I don't see them as successors.
what about the governor of the central bank? Because not as a replacement, but where does she
Nabiulina?
fit? Yeah, where does she fit within this whole dynamic? Because she does do an incredible job, as I say, whether you like it or not. But I think she's quite impressive in how she somehow finds yet another metric or tool that she can tweak to keep the Russian economy looking functional.
She has done very good job. I think that it has taken Russian economy for so long not to fall apart is the result of Nabiulina's work. So I agree that she is brilliant in what she does, but her role is to be the scapegoat. She's not. She's absolutely hated by most in Russia. She's been nominated as the problem of the economy. Russians, if you go on a street of any Russian city and ask a random Russian who is the problem, they'll tell you it's Nabiulina. She has brought us down to the knees because Russian central bank is controlled by the outside forces, most likely by the British, and then they'll tell you all kinds of conspiracy theories about that. Vladimir Putin, the rumors have it, she tried to resign when Putin invaded Ukraine,
Yes.
and Putin did not allow her to resign. And then he gave her a specific goal to keep the inflation low, or under control at least. And she has done a brilliant job on doing that. Okay, but now she is in more and more danger, I think. And sooner or later she will be fired and she will be made the scapegoat. Because Putin now desperately needs scapegoats.
He does. Okay, so let's take a step back and look at the quantitative aspects of this with the economy, because oil prices before the war in Iran became a thing were at about $59 a barrel, which, it's a bit higher than what it was at its particularly low point, which was, I think, $35 that the Russians were selling it in some cases. I remember we had a conversation a couple of months ago and you said it was actually 25. But now it's
Spot
at
prices were 25. That was before the invasion. That was the lowest the price fell, 25. For a few days, spot prices for oil that was present in the ports of Novorossiysk, I believe, and Primorsk up north.
So now it's at 120 or 125. Could go to 200, whatever. Point being is that this couldn't be more of a windfall, break, a reprieve for the Russian economy and Putin's obviously ability to take a sigh of relief. What do you think this means in the short to medium term? Because this doesn't change the structural implications. This doesn't change the systemic challenges. This is what I'm underlining in some of my solo videos, which is, yes, the oil is higher, but of course, if you look at the structural integrity of the Russian economy, it's terrible, for all the reasons you've also alluded to earlier on in the conversation. So take me through a little bit why, how much can Putin leverage this oil boom? But also the limitations.
Well, first of all, it means this Russia is selling oil at higher prices means that Russia is betraying Iran. Instead of halting all oil exports to help Iran, to put more pressure on everyone, so on the USA, so they stop the war, they stop the bombings on Iran, as Putin is supposed to do, because in January of 2025, he signed the strategic agreement, including military agreement with Iran, okay? So instead of helping Iran but not selling Russian oil to others, he is using this opportunity to sell as much as he can, and that is the betrayal of Iran by Russia. Plain and simple, okay? Of how it concerns Russia, well, it certainly will give Russia more money in the short run. In the long run, it's really hard to say. Basically, it's very simple. If oil, and when you mention those numbers, 109, 110, 120, I didn't check this weekend how much oil is trading for. You mentioned Brent. Russian Urals historically is cheaper than Brent. And don't forget that there is still the cap for Russian oil, and that's quite low. It's not 110 or 120, whatever. It's, what is this latest? I believe it used to be $60, now it's $45. So everyone who buys Russian oil for over $45 is a subject to European sanctions. Okay, and no one has lifted those sanctions. That's point number one. Point number two, no one knows how long this situation is going to last for. If Putin sells oil, let's say, even over 60 for quite some time, that's going to fill up Russian budget. It will help Russia to go through 2026. That's for sure. I can't really I can't forecast for long term in this circumstances because there's too much uncertainty.
Mm.
And point number three, it's not going to save Putin. It's going to prolong the agony of Russian economy. But the damage is so big that even selling oil at 90, at 80 is not going to completely change the situation over. Point number four is the limited resources of Russia to sell oil, because Russian shadow fleet has been hurt a great deal. Russian ports, the infrastructure of exporting, there are basically, Russia has a bottleneck. There are two ports, deep sea ports. One is Primorsk, if you look at the north, and one is Novorossiysk, if you look at the south. They are under attacks of Ukrainian drones, and I'm pretty sure if Russia will start exporting more oil from those ports, there will be more and more attacks. So don't forget that Russian oil is not easy and fast to be delivered to customers in India and China, perhaps in other countries. So these 4 points I have. To sum it up, yes, it's going to help Putin in the short run. Probably not going to save him in the long run.
And what about the war campaign? What does it do for Russia on the front lines? I made a video yesterday discussing this fallout from the loss of Starlink. Some people saying that this is old news because it started happening a month ago, but we didn't know the implications of it until now. That's why I'm reporting on it, because we can only get a sense of the impact it's had after a bit of time has passed. And I've been following it for a little bit, and then there was a couple of reports in the Wall Street Journal, in the Financial Times, in the Moscow Times, and it was giving a much deeper analysis of the reality of the loss of Starlink for the Russian command and control system, right, and knowledge. So what do you think the economic side could be for the war?
Pyotr, I suggest you look at the Telegram channels of Z Voyenkory, Z Quasi-Patriots, those who are close to the front lines and report, because the Western media reports everything with a lag. from days to weeks sometimes. If you want to see the current information, go and check their Telegram channels. They usually don't lie, and they started quite a few of them at least, and they started telling about problems right after the Starlink was shut down. So it was very clear that was a huge blow to Russian armed forces, the shutting down of Starlink. Okay, so it's public knowledge in Russia, it's wide knowledge that it's bad. It stripped Russian troops, Russian forces of communications. And another blow is Telegram blocking, because they have, they had two means of communicating between each other, Starlink and Telegram. And then Starlink is gone, Telegram is being banned. So from what I understand, things are not going well in the front lines, in the front for Russia. Russian state, I mentioned in the first part of our conversation, I look for small pieces of information that I consider golden nuggets, and I link them together, and they draw me a bigger picture of what's happening in Russia. And one of those signs is actually Russian propaganda. I see how narratives change or switch or simply die. And one of the narratives that we saw in the end of last year, in the beginning of this year, was Russian troops are advancing rapidly into Ukraine. Kupiansk is under Russian control, and other cities and towns are under threat, and Russians will take over the entire Ukraine soon. Russians are victorious in the front lines, okay? And even Putin himself came into public and made a public statement saying that Kupiansk is ours, we control Kupiansk. And Ukrainian President Zelensky immediately showed up in Kupiansk and made a video on his telephone saying, well, this is Kupiansk and I am Kupiansk. And the Russian propaganda was forcing this information onto Russians that Russian army is victorious. Now it's silent, because there's absolutely nothing to tell Russian people about advancements. Ukrainians are doing counter-offensive campaign right now, okay? So I think Russian army is cooked. Basically, that's how I see the situation in the front lines. There are more and more angry voices coming from inside the armed forces, saying that we have been betrayed. While we are defending Russia here, they're doing assault on our families in Novosibirsk, killing our cows. I heard that Russian officers and soldiers say. There are so many meat grinder attacks now, and Russian cemeteries are expanding at incredible rate, and there is no money right now to pay to the widows of soldiers and to soldiers themselves. I've heard that there are delays in payments, and when that starts happening on a massive scale, then there is trouble. So as of Russian army, not much I can say. It's stuck in Ukraine and it's decaying. That's my understanding. What's happening.
Well, we touched on that before, which is they've got these massive payouts, these bonuses, these sign-up commissions, bonuses for people to join the military forces, but the Russian government is not even able to pay those, right? So they're trying to get more people to sign up for the military, but they're not able then to follow up with the incentives to keep them on. But obviously, once they've gone to the front lines, it's kind of too late for that. And then there's the pensions as well. The impact that this is having on pensions, which is a huge impact because of the older classes and how much they support Putin, rural communities, all that. So he's losing even his most core fan base, getting fed up with him. So as we wrap up for this session, Konstantin, as always, I like to look ahead and understand from you what should we focus on. We'll obviously have you back next month. Maybe we'll do a couple of live streams in the intermediary around the Iran war or something. I think that would be good. I was on your channel to talk about China, and that was amazingly fun. So maybe we can do that again. But otherwise, what would you encourage people to focus on?
Well, before I jump to that, first of all, I'd like to clarify something. Russian state pays in full the sign-up bonuses, but it's not the federal budget, it's provinces' budgets.
Right.
The payments, large sums of money, they come from provinces, and the Russian men who sign up, they receive their sign-up bonuses in full. It's the problem with the budgets of provinces. They are all in red now, all except for 8 provinces. And one of the biggest threats for the economy is the provinces now go to commercial banks and borrow money at commercial rates because Russian federal budget doesn't have money to subsidize them anymore. Okay, so that's where the problem is. So Russians are paid in full. There are delays in payments, but they're not on the massive scale at this point. Okay, when they become on the massive scale, then there's a problem. And I would like us to concentrate on problems in the economy next time we speak, because I think that is going to be the driver of instability. It's going to drive Russia further into chaos. A couple things to watch. Number one is non-payments of salaries to federal employees and non-payments of pensions to the pensioners, retired folks. And number two is the budget deficits of provinces. And that's what we should concentrate on. And before I come back on your channel in a month, let's have another conversation at my channel Inside Russia, and then we'll discuss geopolitical issues that you are an expert on.
Well, appreciate that. Thank you. I've spent a fair amount of time trying to be a source of value there, and I hope people can see that from our conversations as well, Konstantin. It's an absolute pleasure. These are always my favorite to do, and I'm glad that we do this on a monthly basis. And I'm not going to say I'm sure. I know that people have enjoyed our conversation this time around as well. Being slightly facetious, everyone, but I'm British in nature, and my sarcasm is what it is. So, but thank you very much, Konstantin. As always, everyone, do subscribe to Inside Russia. Do join Konstantin as a member. He relies purely on that because I think your channel's demonetized, isn't it? So
It's
you
still
don't
demonetized by Google, yes.
Yeah, so he can't even support himself despite all the incredible work he does. So do support Konstantin, and if you enjoyed my perspective as well, my cheeky little takes and quips, then subscribe to me as well. But otherwise, everyone, we'll see you soon. Take care. See you on the flip side. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you.